All right. Welcome, everybody. I am Cecilia D'Alessandro, Policy Officer in the Sustainable Food Systems Program at ECDPM, the Center for Africa-Europe Relations. Today, I will be moderating this session titled Financing Food Security and Sustainable Food Systems Transformation, which is organized by the Public Finance Working Group as part of the Good Food Finance Week. Catalytic investments in agriculture and food systems are critical to realizing the ambitions of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, and to tackle global food insecurity, which has been greatly worsened by the ripple effects of the Russian war against Ukraine. In this context, multilateral initiatives such as the Good Food Finance Network and the Agricultural Public Development Bank's platform for green and inclusive food systems are working to mobilize resources at scale to support the transformation towards sustainable food systems. But how can public and private financiers work better together to make nutritious food affordable and accessible? And what policy reforms are needed to improve fiscal resilience and promote long-term socioeconomic growth? Today, we welcome 5 experts who will present concrete experiences and discuss opportunities to repurpose public and development expenditures and leverage private financial flows by de-risking sustainable food systems financing. But before I introduce them, allow me to give the floor to Ertuğrul Kausin for the opening remarks. Ertuğrul founded and today guides the Food System for the Future team as CEO and Managing Director of the Good Food Opportunity Fund. The Food Systems for the Future is a supporting partner for the GFFN, and Ertuğrul herself is co-chair. As a global nutrition and food systems thought leader and advocate, Ertuğrul also serves as a distinguished fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and a visiting scholar at the Stanford University. Ertuğrul has also served as the UN World Food Programme Executive Director and previously as US Ambassador to the UN Agencies for Food and Agriculture in Rome. Ertuğrul, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Cecilia, and thank you for setting the stage. The time for doing nothing is no longer an option. Our food system has never been more efficient than it is today. But yet our food systems, our global, regional, and local food systems continue to detrimentally impact our environment, human health, as well as failing to return the economic opportunity, full economic opportunity, for which a productive food and agricultural system should deliver to actors and stakeholders from farmer to those who are investing. Why do I say this? Because nearly 828 million people are food insecure as we sit here today. 70%, and the data suggests that 70% of the 60 largest publicly traded food, agriculture, dairy companies are failing to manage climate risk. We also know that obesity and malnutrition are continuing to escalate diet-related diseases, which between 2021 and 2023 cost the global community some estimated $2.1 trillion. Current agricultural practices are resulting in the challenges that we speak to today. Yet, $700 billion globally are expended by governments on agricultural subsidies to support the system as it operates today. It is important that we move forward in a different direction. The global community embraced, of course, as you noted, Cecilia, the Sustainable Development Goals, and then underscored those goals for Goal 2 in the UN Food System Summit, committing to the transformation of the food system for our environment, to support human health, as well as to support equitable return. We cannot do that without increased financing and multi-stakeholder financing. We need, of course, the financing from the private sector, but public sector dollars, when we talk about the $700 billion, when we talk about what is invested in the food system from the multilateral institutions across the globe, that is where the action must occur to deliver the change that must happen in order to ensure that our food system, which is so critical to achieving the climate goals, as you said, but even more critical to achieving our full human potential from our health standpoint, as well as from a prosperity standpoint. Now is the time for action. I'm so pleased to be here with you today. You have 5 experts with the data in hand to present, to demonstrate the what is possible, as well as the what is required to move us forward. I look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethering, for this call to action. It is very much needed, and therefore, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Hamid Amirani, Senior Investment Advisor to Food Systems for the Future, who will provide a short presentation titled Repurposing Agricultural Support to Promote Fiscal Resilience, Health, and Human and Planetary Health. Hamid is co-leading the Public Finance Catalyst Group and is a member of the working group of the Just Rural Transition. Previously, he served as advisor to the Minister of Finance of Oman and was a member of the Investment Committee of Oman's Sovereign Wealth Fund and is the former CFO of the largest dairy and poultry business in Oman. He therefore has a unique experience combining public, private, and investment perspectives on the food systems transition. Hamid, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecilia. And as Ertin just highlighted, that cost of doing is nothing. I'm sure you are aware of all these externalities that I've sort of taken a simple example. I'm assuming that all of you can see these slides, right? So that's a big assumption. So, I mean, what I would like us to reflect, as we were yesterday sort of mentioned who's one of the co-chair of the GFFN, that remove from it the T. And I'd like us to reflect as what I can do as a government official, what I can do as a private investor, and what I can do as a consumer, to look at these, how can we mitigate these costs of doing nothing? Just imagine, if I'm sitting as a government finance minister's advisor, which I was a few years ago, this thing will scare me, land degradation costing $9 trillion, the obesity costing. What's going to happen to me? I mean, will I end up in a situation as a country importing? Look what happened when the Ukraine thing came to Europe with the gas prices going up and all the sort of haywire came around. So I'll be very worried about my trade deficit. I would be worried about my fiscal deficit. I will be worried about the cost of financing. As an investor, if the cost of financing of the government is going up, the cost of financing of the private sector will go up. If the soil and other sort of infrastructure need more costs, then I'll be worried about my cost of investment. If obesity is costing me about something like, this is just a Chatham House study, it's costing me that much money, I'll be worried about that. As a consumer, I'll be worried about my disposable income because inflation is hitting me, taxation is going to go up, and so and so. So what do we do about it? So, yesterday, the president of US General Assembly, His Excellency Karosi, sort of said, think about science. So here it is a sort of a situation where basically this study was done by Oxford University, Dr. Marcus Springman. And what it is highlighting is that switching to healthy diet, how much can it say? This is just a few countries that I have sort of accumulated. Dr. Marco has done it for most of the countries. And just look at how much the switching of healthy diet can save the governments, about 620 billion. And look at the food wastage. So these amounts are quite interesting, and they could be probably used for repurposing the finances that is required and that has been sort of sought forward. If you go into it in terms of how do we do with this? Okay, so this is where the innovative collaborative funding model is what I've been working on. And basically, what we are trying to do in this model is really going beyond the blended finance by bringing multitude of players and innovation together. And we are going to retwig a little bit of blended conventional finance as to what they can do and look at these donor agencies where they will look at it. So let's look at it, each one of them individually. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm running fast, I'm sorry, but there you go. So this is where if you look at the governments, okay, so here I've highlighted specifically sovereign development funds, So what the government can do, remember, I mentioned earlier on that there is about $1.3 trillion of, the Marcus Springman study saying it, that could be there. But also government can And here, I'll just go back. And if you look at this, the collaborative funding model that I mentioned, think of it as an investment opportunity, okay? So this is an investment opportunity where government can sort of give cheaper land to start with. As the investment we make, the investments are likely to generate more returns. So the rents can go up later on when the returns are going on. Government can monetize some of the assets and some of the money that they're going to save from repurposing the expenditure. Dr. Marco, I think, is going to talk a little bit more about public expenditure, but I would urge you to listen. He's got some interesting ideas. Where these can be applied, this could be applied to mechanization, refrigeration, innovation, and aggregation. I'll talk about aggregation a bit later. What it does, it basically then enhances the investors' benefit, what they benefit in terms of returns. And as a nation, you benefit from sort of malnutrition, diet-related fiscal issues and all. So this is the only thing which I would suggest is that it focus on Sovereign Development Fund, because Sovereign Development Fund can be the government arm. Finance ministries are really a regulatory body. So this is what the suggestion is. And if you go into, so remember the other partner of the innovative collaborative model was the government, and now we are looking at multilateral agency. They provide concession. This is just a transmission of money that goes into it, but it achieves an important element. In Africa today, the borrowing cost is about something like anything between 16 to 18% for a normal sort of investor, which goes out, and especially smallholder farmers suffer even more. So if concession finance comes in through ministry finance. Remember the thing we are talking about as an investor into investment opportunity. So there is land cheap coming in, government assets coming in, and here the cost of finance is going down from 18% south. Now here the concession finance, if it is an investment opportunity, here the donor can definitely track, what their development objectives. Here they can take an aggregation of smallholder farmers. Now this has been successfully applied by African Improved Food and even the USAID in Rwanda. African Improvement Food basically are sourcing maize from the smallholders cooperative. What it does is that it increases the ticket size, which is where the public development banks can get excited about, and even the commercial bank, because individually small farmers are very small. So aggregation and the cooperative successful model that USAID and AIF has done successfully can be really sort of introduced. And then, of course, when the ticket size is there, the cost of monitoring is less, which then they can be employed to improve their technology and whatever the infrastructure that they are lacking, the public development banks and the commercial bank to improve their outreach. Here, the other element, remember that's the right side of the innovative collaborative funding model, not the blended finance, but other. This is something new that we are introducing, is basically here you have already, sustainable USAID and such sustainable food transformation in the UK, which has done one good report, which is called Feeding the Britain Report. And USAID has done a good report on Feeding the Rwanda report. And both have illustrated the importance of expertise, the technical expertise, to teach farmers and help farmers to improve their land allocation. USAID has done terraces in the hilly areas of Rwanda to accumulate the water so that the water is available for the entire region, therefore generating increased crop production. AIF has done applied drying equipment in the cooperative for the small farmers, so the maize infection has gone down from 97 to 3%. So this is the thing. And again, going back to the investment opportunity, when it is an investment opportunity, donors can have a signed shareholders agreement where basically when the investment starts maturing and delivering return, they can get their cost, which they have injected earlier, back. So therefore, donors are here first time becoming self-financing, de-risking. What is all the fuss is about, that why the food transition is not taking place. Here, innovation. We all know about innovation. How can it reduce significantly the cost of doing business? We at the moment, FSF is looking at introducing black soldier fly as an alternative to animal feed. Now, what innovations are interested? Okay, they are interested in opportunities to apply the new innovation at scale. When those innovations are applied at scale, they are able to attract the growth capital. So completely aligned with this. So here is an opportunity, again, wearing an investment opportunity shareholder. We can even attract sort of some basically patent rights and royalties when we are giving them an opportunity. So here is another sort of an opportunity to bring the different sort of stake think tank. Now look at the lusty investors, right? I'm sorry, I use that because I was one of them wearing the cap of investment committee member of Oman Investment Fund. Look, farmland already is generating good returns. Okay, these are statistics. Okay, they've generated 11% return, total annual return. Historically, they've been one of the best inflation hedge. As an asset sort of thing, diversification provides a phenomenal opportunity to diversify their asset. But look at the sweet thing. Now they're getting investment opportunities where Sovereign Wealth Fund or Sovereign Development Fund is an anchor investor. There is concession finance coming in. There is land cheap coming to significantly de-risk the cost of financing. We are bringing in the best excellent agriculture practices, so de-risking the land degradation, soil improvement, improving yield phenomenally, putting in irrigation equipment, which I'm sure Dr. Markov is going to talk about when he's talking about this thing. And I would be very interested to hear Susil talking about, his experience in Kenya, and I'm sure you'll learn from that. So this is where the investors can be quite interested because now it's been significantly de-risked. And final element, let's look at, now at the moment, there is a lot of pressure on neutralizing the carbon emission costs. Well, there are basically three ways you can do it. Either you stop doing your business, or look at this chart, okay, on the left. I mean, how the transition value of emission, where is the biggest area that people are going in? It's the forestry. Why they're going this? Because this is still considered to be relatively cheaper. Or then look at on the right side, where you buy the voluntary credit and look at the cost is going. It's almost becoming unsustainable for businesses to buy it. Right now. It's not even mature. Just imagine where the cost is. And don't forget, when they invest, okay, they can attract basically on the carbon neutral projects, okay, they can attract less than 2%, conventional sort of cost of financing, they can attract cheaper finances. So I hope I've given you some sense of where, how the blended finance can be revolutionized by bringing other partners, treating it as an investment opportunity where donors has a de-risking it because they can become self-finance. Investors are de-risking it because already the cost of finance is addressed. The best of people of doing the business is addressed. Innovation gets an opportunity to scale. So therefore, there are more chances of innovation. I heard yesterday in the private sector sort of session that investment innovation is really sort of not getting as high as it should be because people are worried about the risk. So I hope this model provides you with the de-risking mechanism. Thank you for your time. I hope I have not overrun the time. Thank you, Cecilia. Over to you.
Thank you, Amit. You were right in time. So thanks very much for sticking to the time. And also thanks for a very insightful presentation on the innovative collaborative funding model. I would like now to open our panel discussion. As the chair, I will start by asking our panelists one key question, and then each panelist will have 7 minutes to respond per question. Then I will take some questions from the audience for the remaining time. Let me first introduce all our speakers. First, we have Marco Sanchez, who is Deputy Director of the Agri-Food Economics at FAO, where he directs the reports, the state of food security and nutrition in the world and the state of food and agriculture, which most of you will be familiar with. Previously, he was senior economist at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs and economist at the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Then we have Melissa Miners, who has over 12 years of experience in sustainability strategy, communications, external affairs, and public policy. She has spent the past 10 years working in various roles at Unilever, working on the sustainability strategy and focusing on sustainable commodity production, and more broadly on the thematic areas of climate, circular economy, and plastics. Now she has left Unilever and is consulting externally. We then have Sauli Hurri, who works at IFAD as Senior Regional Technical Specialist based in Nairobi. He is the technical focal point on rural markets and value chains for IFAD's operations across the Eastern and Southern African countries. And he previously worked at ILO as project manager for a World Bank finance program in Laos that facilitated access to small businesses to finance, and on value chain and rural private sector development with IFAD's Southeast Asia program based in Vietnam. Last but not least, we have Mr. Saleh Shanfari, who is a leading agribusiness professional with more than 30 years of experience, both in government and private sector roles. He is the former CEO at the Oman Food Investment Holding Company, the country's leading state-owned food security company. And he's also the chairman of the Food Security Committee at the Oman Chamber of Commerce and Industry and a steering committee member of the Oman Animal and Plant Genetic Resources Center. So we have quite an interesting panel. Without further ado, I would like to pose now the first question to our panelists. Marco will share his perspectives first. I'd like to ask you if you could share what kind of technical support is FAO providing to countries in repurposing their domestic budgets, and what kind of tools are being used with what purpose? So please, Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia. It's an honor to be sharing some of the work that FAO is now developing in a few countries. Let me just share my screen just to show you a couple of slides that I think are important. Let me start with something that takes me right into some of the things that Hamid was referring to. And I like to ask for, let me begin with a question that Hamid posed among others. What can a government official do in front of what is going on? Let me start with this slide. This slide comes from the SOFI report last year, which was about repurposing, by the way, support to food and agriculture. And not only are we finding that support is going to the food system, to the agri-food system through different mechanisms, but I want to focus on the total. So according to our estimates, and there are other estimates that actually come out with higher numbers, about $630 billion were going on an average per year to the food and agricultural sector. Now, how do I put this number into a comparison? Well, Hamid talks about trillions. I'm going to be very modest here. I'm talking about billions, but this is still a lot of money. So you take, for example, the landscape of climate finance in 2020. Only for climate finance, you have a number that is pretty similar to the one that we're talking about food and agricultural support. That's a lot of money. That's really a lot of money for a food system that is showing some fragilities, as the previous speakers show. We have fragilities in many senses. I mean, this support is not equitably distributed. Some of the support is going to production forms that are really unsustainable. We are not really helping to reduce food insecurity at the speed that we need, and nearly 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. So now there is not much money going on, that we can really scale up for agri-food systems, unless we do the things that Hamid was explaining about. And I will focus more about how can we redeploy public expenditures. But now there is a problem because some countries cannot even think about repurposing too much. They don't have a lot of support in the first place. So you take this table, for example, you see that low-income countries, if you look at support as a share of value of production, are nearly not really promoting any producers or consumers through subsidies. They don't have the means. So at the FAO, we're trying to look at this problem and say, hold on a minute, how can we help these countries? Obviously, one of the key issues here is international development finance. And this relates to what Hamid was presented. But we cannot wait until that finance comes into these countries. And we need to talk with these governments and try to, get through solutions in the meantime. And one of the solutions that we have been working on at the FAO is through the Monitoring and Analyzing Food and Agricultural Policies program, which we call MAFAP. And this program is actually now going all the way down to earth from the global advocacy that we have already seen on repurposing to really working with countries, ministries of finance, national planning authorities, ministries of agriculture, and so on and so forth. And we are now working with them, analyzing their budgets, what they look like, what they get out of the budget for agri-food systems and outcomes, and what they could get if they think differently. Now, how can they think differently? Well, here as an economist, I bring a concept, which is optimization. Basically, you have a budget, governments have a budget, and they have a bunch of constraints. Hamid talked about some of the fiscal constraints. They have debt constraints and so on and so forth. So we try to work around what can you do under these constraints, right? And I will show you just the example of Ethiopia, where we are working now full speed with government counterparts. We are working with them. We are analyzing, we are monitoring, and we are creating scenarios with them and their validation. So you see, this is the budget of Ethiopia in 2025 in business as usual. This is how it is reallocated, keeping things without changes. So here you have the budget of Ethiopia in 2025 by different areas of investments. And here you have the same budget of Ethiopia by sector of commodities. If you work with the government and you say, let's optimize this budget to reduce the cost of a healthy diet, which is this first scenario here, you see that the budget changes completely. It's a very different budget, but it's the same money. This is the point I want to make. It is the same money, but they have to spend it very differently. So here they will increase irrigation in those cereals. They will have to reduce rural roads expenditures and so on and so forth. Now, you see it by commodity, it is the same. They have to start investing more in vegetables. They have to invest more in pulses and so on and so forth, because the objective is to reduce the cost of a healthy diet. Now, what happens if we add more objectives? And here I'm going to introduce what we call inclusive agricultural transformation objectives, which is let us transform, let us have more agri-food GDP, more off-farm jobs in rural areas, and less rural poor. So then if you do that, you have scenarios like this one here, where your reconfiguration of the budget changes again. So you see, there may be different solutions depending on what are your objectives. And we are trying to work with the governments in understanding these alternatives. Now, why is this important? This is important because of the results you get with exactly the same money. So the next slide shows some of the results that we are coming up with in these scenarios. So this is a scenario where the government is pursuing agricultural transformation objectives. And this is impressive. With the same money, you see that in Ethiopia, by 2025, if you reallocate optimally, then about almost 500,000 people would get out of poverty. You would create 450,000 jobs in rural areas in Ethiopia with the same money. And more than 2 million people could afford a healthy diet that they are not affording today. So these numbers are really, really big time for low-income countries that cannot have all the money that they need to really transform agri-food systems. Now, if you look at Mozambique, Burkina Faso, and Uganda, the results are impressive. They are getting, the opportunity here to reallocate budgets differently. So this is what we are doing in the FAO. And obviously, when you start spending differently, not only will you get these results for people and the health, but also you start generating a better environment for the private sector to come in, right? And this goes along with all what Hamid was speaking about reducing investments and so on and so forth, because the government is taking the first step into the repurposing of its domestic budget. Over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marco, for these insights. I would like to give the floor to our second speaker, Melissa Meiners, to reflect on the following question. We'd like to ask you, Melissa, what role can businesses play to support the agenda for repurposing subsidies? And how can they actively involve and incentivize farmers to adopt sustainable practices and accelerate the good food finance transition? Perhaps you can use examples from your own experience as well as knowledge of companies involved in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be here today. Apologies for the strange angle, but I'm on my phone, so please shout if it goes strange. It was mentioned in the introduction that I'd been at Unilever for 10 years working in public policy and advocacy, and I left Unilever a couple of months ago, and for the last few months I've been supporting the World Business Council for Sustainable Development on a programme on business action to support the whole repurposing subsidies movement. And I'll just talk you through a bit of the work that we've been doing. So WBCSD has identified repurposing subsidies as kind of a key advocacy opportunity in their food and agriculture pathway. So we've been interviewing companies, agribusiness companies, to understand what type of advocacy messages would work for them and what type of business action could businesses take towards this movement. And I think the first thing to note is that overwhelmingly businesses were in support of this movement, but very unsure about how to do this. It's a highly political topic. Companies like Unilever can't just go straight to certain governments and talk about this. So there was very much kind of the unanimous feeling that there was an opportunity for businesses to do this collectively through WBCSD. And also working on the back of the huge momentum that was felt in the business sustainability community following post COP15 and the Global Biodiversity Framework and Target 18. And again, businesses advocated in support of this target, but what is their contribution to making this happen? So this is building on much of the previous work through Business for Nature and the B team looking at kind of subsidy reform. But we wanted to really hone in on kind of practical supply chain actions for now, and then advocacy messages at a global level. And then also realizing that countries could kind of take this further and hone into their to the geographies that were most material to their supply chain. So it's also building on the work of one business, the coalition called OP2B, which is One Planet Business for Biodiversity, and they've recently done a piece of work showing the business case for regenerative agriculture, and within this they're highlighting this transition period. So the move, companies have set many regenerative agriculture goals, and the move to regenerative agriculture is going to be expensive for companies. So how do we look at kind of strategies to help finance the transition gap? So I'm just looking at the research in front of me, but so ultimately businesses agree it's imperative we transform our food and land use systems. We often as businesses feel one step removed from policymakers. So what's our role here? We believe that there's a key opportunity to incentivise and reward farmers for their efforts in driving sustainable food and land use transformation. And often it's not just kind of public money that we're talking about. Many companies have their own incentives for farmers and payments for ecosystem services. And I think there's definitely a role for businesses to communicate that we're all heading in the same direction. You know, this isn't kind of a piece of CSR. This is built into businesses' long-term strategies. And it's all about systemic change, you know, that we have to kind of work through our coalitions, build this into our strategies. Unilever, for example, used to have a sustainability strategy and a business strategy. These now work together. But at the moment, there needs to be more understanding. You know, lots of businesses have really indirect supply chains. Unilever in particular, all of the sourcing is through suppliers. So the company works on a huge scale in many different geographies to implement something called its Sustainable Agriculture Code and its Regenerative Agriculture Principles, and socialise these with farmers. So although there is a very indirect supply chain, there's a huge opportunity to work with suppliers and to work through suppliers with hundreds of thousands of farmers. But there's a lack of understanding in terms of kind of what subsidies are received, or even kind of a view to where these are going at the moment. So the two main buckets of opportunities that we've identified are, firstly, as agriculture subsidy reform becomes increasingly inevitable, businesses should understand the opportunities and risks this poses for their businesses and identify ways to leverage these opportunities and mitigate these risks. So we've been writing this up and we'll be publishing this and looking at examples of where the risks and opportunities are and the types of business actions that businesses could take now. And secondly, and potentially a bigger piece of work for now, is contributing to the repurposing agenda through advocacy by firstly calling on governments to repurpose subsidies in line with business sustainability goals, so proving kind of what our goals are and what the roadmap is. Sharing knowledge and best practice in incentivising farmers, showing which kind of case studies are there and able to be scaled in certain geographies, and how we're incentivising farmers to adopt more sustainable practices, and kind of giving this information to policymakers, and showing that businesses in the food and agriculture sector are also investing in sustainable food and land use system. We've got many examples of kind of programs where we have paid an amount of money for research and public money has matched that. We've got examples of where companies have helped farmers like look for relevant subsidies and help them kind of fill out the forms and apply for subsidies. But I think some of this information needs to be unearthed and publicly available, so many more people can read it. And obviously the specific need for public support to farmers varies by context, and businesses looking to engage in this agenda will need to understand the local context in the markets they operate in order to contribute to this agenda more effectively. And what we're doing through this research is publishing some of these examples so WBCSD can leverage this and work on this in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. We are certainly looking forward to the published report once ready, and I'm sure participants in the call will be happy to receive it as well. I'd like now to hand over to our third speaker, Sauli Hurri. I would like to ask you, Sauli, if you can share your experience at IFAD working on blended finance in Kenya, and specifically if you have if you can share what are some of the challenges that you have faced in implementing blended finance programs, but also what solutions and best practices have you identified? Sauli, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Cecilia, and thanks for the invitation to speak at this forum. Maybe those who don't know yet, IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development, is one of the UN agencies with a dedication and a special focus on smallholder agriculture and small producers in the rural areas and developing economies for their benefit. And we operate a business model of direct or investments to programs implemented by governments through IFAD financing, but also recently financing directly to private sectors. So that's in 20 seconds what IFAD is. So today I want to answer Cecilia's question by giving you an example from Kenya, which is a project called Rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility, which is in a way a practical example of some of the types of solutions or aspirations that were presented previously by other colleagues on what should we do to promote financing to smallholder producers. So let me share my screen to explain you what we do in this project called Rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility. Please let me know if you don't see it, but I think you can.
We can see it.
Perfect. So we indeed try to mobilize and help provide financing dedicated for agriculture and food systems in the Kenyan context, but not by providing direct investments to companies or direct investment to small producers from IFAD program or project, but rather the aspiration is to go through local financial institutions in Kenya who can assist and facilitate financing to the last mile who are in the most need of financing. As maybe some of you know, the banking sector in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa has difficulty in providing funding to the small producers because of the high risk or high perceived risk, but also low transactions or small ticket sizes, which then increases the cost per transaction for them because they have to deploy their staff and others. So there's a limited incentive for financial institutions to go into this space. But there are some, and there's some aspiration because the market is growing. So, from IFAD, what we try to do is provide incentive for commercial financing into this space. So instead of providing public financings through public development institutions, we would work with the public development institutions then to provide incentive for the private sector to go and do this financing at the last mile effectively and efficiently and sustainably in the long term. This project, as you see here, has 2 or 3 components. First component is to provide technical assistance to different layers, including setting up the type of financial instruments that we roll out. Second part of the technical assistance to provide a TA for the banks and the other private sector financial institutions, including savings, cooperatives, and microfinance banks, and then the commercial banks. And then third layer of technical assistance is for the clients or the end beneficiary of this program. So these would be the clients of the financial institutions who benefit from also from the BDS business development service by the project. Then we have the second component, which would be on the financial instruments or financing instruments of the project, which include one credit guarantee scheme of $20 million, which helps to guarantee pari passu basis, meaning that we take half of the risk, roughly, of commercial banks, microfinance banks, and SACCOs that are ready to invest in the space. the food systems and food sector. And the $20 million of investment into the guarantee structure will mobilize. There's a technique to it. I don't have time to explain it, but it will mobilize about $80 million of investments into the value chains, into the food and agriculture and target groups. Then we have another financing instrument, which is a direct credit line to something what we call green financing facility. Oh, by the way, both of them are hosted by public sector agents. So since we are talking about public-private, or let's say public financing and how to use it to leverage the private one. So here, both of them are such instruments. So the green financing facility is a credit line hosted by a public development bank, which then on-lends the resource to SACCOs and microfinance banks, who then on-lend the resource to the end clients, which are the very last mile, so the most rural and most difficult access clients, concessional terms, and putting in their own budget into it. So not adding significantly. I mean, it's not like the guarantee that leverages 4 times, but at least they put some of their own budget also, so we get to 20 million of investments also into the same target groups. Probably smaller companies and more micro, the small investments. And then we have another component of enabling rural finance environment. This is some policy work with the government to enable that all of this is done or can be done effectively. Our end targets is about 100 million of investments, more than 30 participating local financial institutions that come from these commercial banks, SACCO, MFPs, about 47,000 small producers and 1,500 MSME that then reach out to 320,000 individual beneficiaries. And we also at IFAD always ensure that in our programs we have equal participation of women and men, and then youth also should be participating in the program for the reason that you know there's a huge youth population growing in Kenya that needs you know to be absorbed in the labor market and in the agriculture sector. So this is one practical example, I think, that can put some flavor into the theory and into the big picture about what could be done to make some of these aspirations happen on the ground. So we're quite proud of that program, and we hope that it will be successful. This is now at the startup phase, and we can present probably again in another year to see the first results. Thank you. Thanks, Cecilia. Back to you.
Thanks, Sauli. Looking forward to that, looking forward to your results. I think it's very important to have practical examples. I'd like to then, with that in mind, move to the last speaker, Mr. Sahel Shamfari. I'd like to know if you could comment about your experience at the Oman Food Investment Company and how you've been a catalyst for running agribusinesses commercially and to contribute to achieving food security in your country. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Cecilia. And thanks to all the commentators, quite impressive speeches and efforts by all. And I'm here also to share with you part of my experience in developing a food security vehicle. As you know very well, the GCC countries, the region where I'm from, do suffer from a lack of water and soil, as well as ability to produce more food. So most of the food is imported due to so many reasons. Oman maybe and maybe Saudi is an exception in the sense they have different sort of geographies that allow for some kind of food to be produced locally. I.e., for example, picture behind my back is from the Indian Ocean that has ample fish, and then you have the areas in the mountains of Oman, which has great grazelands that are having around 1.5 million cattle that is grazed during rainy seasons and so on. So, but majority speaking, 90% of the food is imported. The last couple of years since 2020, with the COVID-19 lockdown, as well as the Ukraine-Russian war, we have seen a great impact on what have happened to the value chain and to the food supplies in the region. Government intervention have really removed a lot of worries, and there was no panic buying and so on. However, going back to the history, we have anticipated in 2010, we have anticipated, after the 2008 food supply problems, that we have anticipated that there should be a problem and the government should be ready. So working very closely with the private sector, the government have decided to start a food security vehicle, which I was mandated to run for around 10 years. I'm just coming to an end of my term. And what we have achieved in the last 10 years is quite impressive in the sense it was a collaborative model where government starts a project, invites a private sector, and slowly the government plans to leave and hand over the whole thing to the private sector. That is one way of doing it. Second model was to work very closely with the smallholders by bringing both government as well as private sector to work together with the grassroots to develop things like contract farming. In the contract farming, we have a number of modalities that we can look at. I'm just gonna focus in one of the programs that maybe Hamid knows very well when he was advisor to the government of Oman. That is the milk collection project. In the south of Oman, we have around 250,000 grazed cattle, which is the small farmers. They had no opportunity of selling their milk except through a cottage industry. So what we did with working closely with regional organizations as well as government and private sector is to develop a milk collection system that will allow these small farmers to bring in their milk, tested, and then processed by the collection centers. That has resulted in the pilot project that has resulted in that the smallest farmer can get a minimum of around, say, $500 per month, which is quite an impressive in improving the livelihood of these families. And some of the families are getting something like around $3,000 per month. Just imagine somebody who was a zero income from his cattle, and now all of a sudden he has this kind of income through a model that is workable. The model is really simple. It's workable through through working very closely with the local authorities and the local elders, as well as the young educated boys and girls, to train them how to really improve the livelihood of the animals, how to improve the cattle management system, and how to milk in a more hygienic way, and then test. We have a testing center that will do an online testing result immediately, which shows to the farmers that what is the quality of his milk, and immediately that is transferred into a credit to his account. At the end of the month, he will get his money from his bank, and so on. These some of the examples that government, not only in the GCC, but also we can learn from this in the areas, for example, where I have some activities currently advising some dairy companies in Tanzania. I'm now talking to them to convince them that this model can be copied easily, because the cost of developing the whole solution, the whole system, does not cost much. If you talk about $25 million, for example, for this project, it would be more than suffice to say that it would be good to serve around 30,000 farmers easily, and look at the changes it would have into their quality life, and their hygiene, their education, the gender equalities, and the sustainability from food waste, and from nutritional uplifting to the various communities. This is just one example of what we're doing. We apply the same now to other farmers who produce fruits like dates, and where we go and collect the dates from the farmers, and it is packed and shipped to all over the world. And the livelihood of the farmers, smallholder, have been improved through an idea that Hamid mentioned above, which is the aggregation of smallholders. It's quite an impressive idea, and it is workable. And I think the role of FAO and IFAD is highly appreciated in areas of working very closely with the small farmers, be it in Africa or the Southeast Asia and other places, where you can see immediately the improvements and the result of the smallholders and their families and their education, as well as the quality of life improvement. And I think we have opportunities where we can bring the government through and the private sector to work together in a collaborative mode, and then also make sure that the smallholders, grassroots are highly benefited from these activities, because you need to be very close to the local communities, talk to them, understand their difficulties, and then uplift them through an inclusive solutions that would make them more attractive and more lured to continue working very closely with these kind of programs. It should be a subsidized solution from government or international agencies, and then a private sector would need to see the bottom line coming from there, and the government will also should at one stage leave the whole scene to both local communities as well as private sector to work together to make sure that what they do is sustainable and commercially viable to everybody. This is how I see it.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh, for sharing your experience in Oman. We are running a little late, so we don't have a lot of time for Q&A, but I would still like to give a chance to some of the questions we received in the chat to be answered. So allow me to read out to you a couple of questions, and then the speakers can jump in as they see fit. The first question we received was from Pratima Nalabolu, and the question was about how can finance be used to promote policy changes to promote the transformation from industrial agriculture to an agriculture that can create less environmental and human health damage. And perhaps let me combine this question with another question from Josef van Mierlo in terms of what can be done to ensure that small producers are, especially in Africa, are included in financial inclusion programs. Who would like to take the floor to answer these questions? Or I may have to call upon you. Perhaps Marco, would you like to give it a go?
Well, on the issue of finance, I think Hamid gave a really a good package of information. I mean, finance itself is a means to the end. Without finance, there is nothing we can really think about in transformation, to be honest with you. Even when we talk about repurposing public budgets, we are talking about financing, because these public budgets are financed by all taxpayers, right? The key issue on finance is, who does it get it? That's the question, right? We Saleh and some other colleagues here were talking about the small farmers. How do we ensure that everybody who needs finance gets the finance? But at the same time, it cannot be about the public sector. I mean, the public sector has limits. There is politics that actually hampers the fluency of the finance to those actors or stakeholders that most need it. So the private sector must come in. Now, in order for those two to join forces, then it is critical that policymakers de-risk, because the moment policymakers de-risk, then the finance makes sense to many private sector stakeholders. So finance, I don't think we need to discuss much about why is finance necessary for transformation. It is really something that we cannot think about without it at all. The key issue is how the public sector and the private sector join forces to do this. And from the perspective of the FAO, two key issues are: make it equal. Don't finance something if it creates inequalities. But also, the little money that everybody pays as taxpayer needs to be justified, right? And the best way to do it is when you really, as a government, for example, try to optimize, get the most for everybody on this money. but at the same time thinking about how you de-risk, because in agriculture, in agri-food systems, everything is deemed very risky. You know, if our colleague here put it very clearly, you know, it's a very risky business. So the issue is, how do you repurpose to those solutions that will de-risk? So you reduce the costs, and then you promote more adoption because the private sector will come in and invest. Over.
Thanks, Marco, for these insights. Amit, would you like to add anything to this? Or perhaps I can take up also a question from the audience regarding the true price calculation. Lisette van Bentum from NFP, which is the Netherlands Food Partnership, asks, how can the true price calculation help deliver the necessary transparency of externalities, helping the financial sector to finance those value chains with the least externalities and the least negative social, environmental, and health impacts, and on the other hand, helping governments to provide the right incentives and policies to stimulate the reduction of externalities. Perhaps, Hamid, if you'd like to comment quickly on this, and then I would like to give the floor for the closing remarks to my colleague, Francesco Rampa, since we're approaching 4 p.m.
I mean, look, it's very important to look at the bigger picture. I think this is where the finance ministries and the high and mighties of the government unfortunately need capacity building to look at it. And I mean, I was just telling you that if I'm going to stare at the land degradation cost, the obesity cost, and try to look at it rather than just looking at what is my subsidy at the time, is not the right approach. I think it's a capacity building. I think it's important to look at the bigger picture. What we have shared today is really a lot of de-risking. I mean, we are telling to the government that, look, there is a scientific proven sort of thing which says that if you switch to healthy diet, you can save, just among 5 or 6 countries, nearly $1.3 trillion. I mean, that's what more you need. So we are not asking for fresh capital here, okay? Also, we are asking in the innovative collaborative model that, okay, you don't have to write a check of land, okay? Give us peppercorn rent in the beginning. When the investments start realizing higher return, you get your money. This has exactly happened in African improved food in Rwanda. Do you know that after 4 years, they've made profits? And now the Rwanda Sovereign Wealth Fund is getting the dividends out of it. So there you go. The example is there, you know, but I will pause here because I would love to hear Francesco, you know, summarizing all in the last few minutes. Over to you, Francesco.
Thank you, Amit. I would like to give the floor indeed to my colleague, Francesco Rampa, who heads the ECDPM Sustainable Food Systems team and has been also seconded to the Italy's Prime Minister's office and served as technical advisor on Africa and development dossiers with the G8, G20, and G8 with G5 dialogue processes. So he has quite a large experience to bring in, as well as a difficult job now in summarizing what we've heard today. Please, Francesco, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. And there is no way I can summarize this fantastic conversation, thanks to all of you, including the participants, because they went deeper in some of the issues with the chat. I think today we observed the fact that there's a lot happening on the ground. Really, you know, Sauli, Saleh, Hamid explained that these things happen. If you go to a particular country, we have instruments. These things are moving. Finance, public, private is going in the right direction. Marco showed the amounts and the levels of benefits you can get. I think Melissa pointed, however, that there is a lot of political economy here. You know, it's very difficult for these individual fantastic examples to reach the scale. And the fact that, as Ertarin stated at the beginning, the numbers are still bad globally on the food systems level shows that all of these fantastic examples and instruments are not adding up. So I conclude, if you want, with 2 messages about process issues. We need all. That's maybe why I'm speaking here, because we as ECDPM are part of the Public Finance Catalyst Group of the Good Food Finance Network. There are organization platforms like the GFFN that try to bring the fantastic experiences on the ground at the global level, because we need consistent messages, consistent narratives. We need to bring the ministers of finance. I think today is very clear that we need to bring the ministers of finance into the food system circles. We don't see them enough. But this year we have the joint ministerial meeting of agriculture of the European Union and the African Union. We have the stock take event of the Food System Summit for the first time at the end of July. We have the Financing Common Summit, where all the public development banks gather. We have the fall meetings of World Bank and IMF. and we have COP28. We can see this as a journey, but what we have heard today needs to be fed systematically, and we need to keep inviting ministers of finance to this event. It's not about food, it's not about climate, it's all about the nexuses between these things. And without the ministers of finance, there will not be any change in the way finance, especially public, goes in order to stimulate private finance. A second key final message, in my opinion, for process-wise, we heard a lot the word aggregation. We heard the word smallholder farmers as the focus. Without aggregation as a risk tool, without supporting much more in all of the process we're talking about, smallholder farmers to get together in cooperatives. There was also a final question about how do we do with the people who don't have land registration. We need to find innovative ways to bring the voices of the farmers, the ones without land, into higher organization, like the World Business Council is doing for the big companies. We need similar institutions at the local level to systematically represent the voice of the farmers, because this is the way they can direct finance. This is the way they can access finance. This is the way they can contribute to really aggregating the voices and supporting public finance and the Minister of Finance to understand where they need to invest most. That's why we insist in the GFFN week about public-private coordination, about matching global issues with locals. Today, fantastic ideas of what to do really concretely on the ground. Marco gave us the big numbers of the global benefits. We keep connecting public, private, and local and global. And I think we need to insist, all of you, all of us, please, all of you as well, not only the GFFN, throughout the year about what you've heard today. And I think we can probably meet a year from now with a bit more interaction between ministers of finance, with the food system circles, and hopefully better results. So thanks again on behalf of everyone here. It was fantastic to have you. Definitely, please keep in touch. The journey is just started.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesco, for these closing remarks. I would like to thank our speakers for sharing your insights about financing food security and a transformation to sustainable food systems. And on behalf of the Public Finance Catalyst Group and ECDPM, thanks to everyone for attending. Wishing you all a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.